when we're talking about like a hydroxide surge, and we're talking about, our focus, North American and European supply to meet North American and European demand, we're focusing today just on America.
Welcome back to Rockstock Channel, and thanks for checking in. Before we launch into the interview, we'd like to thank all our Patreon sponsors. And for those of you who are new, share a bit about us. RK Equity is an advisory firm run by Rodney, Hooper, and me, Howard Klein. We are exclusively focused on raising awareness about companies producing or developing the next generation critical raw materials that are powering Tesla's EV battery energy transition. Please register your email at rkequity.com and follow Rodney and me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please also subscribe to this channel, Rockstock Channel on YouTube, as well as Lithium Ion Rocks on SoundCloud for our podcasts. Please note, Rodney and me are not financial advisors or broker-dealers. Nothing you hear in this video is investment advice. Please do your own research and read the disclaimer at the end of this video or on our website. Thanks again for the support, and let's get into the video.
Okay, good morning, Rodney. It is April 14th, and you just published your proprietary monthly, which goes out to our Patreon subscribers and other, corporate clients. But why don't you give us a summary of that for this next installment of Q&A with Rodney Hooper?
Howard, a couple of things that I've updated. Total lithium demand in 2030, that's aggregating battery and non-battery, that's now up to 2.85 million tons. I thought that was high, and then I read UBS's report and they're at 4.4. So not quite as bullish as them, but it's definitely a meaningful uplift from where we've been. About 1.8 of hydroxide and 1.1 of carbonate at that point. So about two-thirds, one-third. I'm calling on the US to have 600 gigawatt hours of battery demand. That's between EVs and energy storage by 2030. That correlates to about 500,000 tons of lithium demand in 2030.
So 500,000 of the 2.9 million tons of lithium is going to be the United States. That's about 17.5%. That's about 25% of the hydroxide market is going to be America.
Of the battery quality. Yeah. We know that new models coming out are targeting the two most important segments, which is SUVs and pickup trucks. And those are very big battery packs. A lot of the models are over 100 kilowatt hours.
Okay. So when we're talking about like a hydroxide surge, and we're talking about, our focus, North American and European supply to meet North American and European demand, we're focusing today just on America. When you think about that, and you also think about, you mentioned UBS's forecast, but Macquarie was out there with new price forecasts, and they're forecasting, I think, $16,000 a ton for hydroxide against $13,000 for carbonate, and there to be a pervasive, premium. Those who could produce hydroxide, at a low cost and getting that premium, and focused kind of on the US market. If the US actually, so if the demand is 500,000, if the US were to implement like Europe in aspiration to secure their raw materials, 80% lithium, in America, that would be like, let's say 400,000 tons of lithium hydroxide.
It's going to be largely new projects, greenfield projects that are going to have to do the heavy lifting. So there are a number of projects, and certainly North America as a total. As we discuss, we think hard rock can definitely play an anchoring role in that. You've got Piedmont, obviously, in the States, and then you've got, in my opinion, good quality, low impurity spodumene deposits in Canada that can either be converted there, but I think there's definitely a market for shipping spodumene to the US, to jurisdictions within the US that are pro hosting, chemical plants.
But just for ease of math, let's say the United States wants to source and has demand for about 400,000 tons of battery grade lithium hydroxide by 2030. So what you're saying is, 20 Piedmonts are necessary for Piedmont's first project. Piedmont has, aspirations to have multiple projects.
If I frame it, Howard, this in 2021, where we're seeing a massive uplift in demand in EVs, the battery grade hydroxide market demand is going to be about 130,000 tons. So what you're talking about and what we're discussing here is that the US on its own will be 3 times the global demand for battery grade hydroxide in 2021.
It's kind of like 12 billion, maybe 12 to 15 billion dollars of investment that will be needed in building 20 Piedmont. We've talked about our preference, and Ganfeng's preference, and Albemarle's preference is hard rock, right? From a speed and scalability. Beyond Piedmont, there's not much plain vanilla hard rock outside of North Carolina, but just across the border in Canada, there is. And we've talked about this North American Lithium triangle encompassing Quebec, Ontario, as well as North Carolina. And then if you factor in that Tesla is building hydroxide from hard rock, right, you could almost call it a quadrilateral in that sense. These regions can be importing from Western Australia spodumene. They could be importing from Brazil. And if AVZ and, the DRC ever gets up and running, there's no reason that, that couldn't be exported here. And with the rise in spodumene prices, projects like that could become economic. The incremental kind of Piedmonts, you have Galaxy is advancing, they're James Bay. You have Critical Elements, you have Frontier. You have Sayona, which is partnered with Piedmont. When you do the math and you have studied these the quantum of hard rock supply, how much could be sourced, do you think, from Quebec, Ontario and North Carolina combined, from the hard rock to hydroxide, spodumene being the preferred feedstock. How much of that 400,000 do you think is achievable by 2030 from that category of lithium?
To my mind, a lot of them are good grade. Frontier's got phenomenal grade, but and Nemaska, which you didn't mention, that they're also coming online, is 150,000 to 200,000 LCE should be doable out of Canada, in my opinion. We look at it realistically. If you want 400,000 domestically, you need 600,000 to 700,000 tons of capacity. So you're going to actually need more like 35 Piedmonts to come on, equivalent of all across all of these projects. On the 35 times 600, you're now talking about 21 billion.
But the logic of doing what Australia is doing in America makes a lot of sense, given the world is shifting toward Europe and the United States. When those plans were made in Western Australia by Albemarle, by Tangxi, the market was very much China, and it's now become Europe, and it's increasingly going to become America. And
that's a very good point, Cloud, because if you remember, you asked Luke Kassam exactly that question, and he said we go where the customers are.
How do you think about clay projects versus DLE? What would you speculate? Where would the supply come from to complement the hard rock to hydroxide?
Again, you're kind of going to need to have a go at all of these. So we've got to will them into existence and support them, because otherwise you're not going to get to the 2.85 unless you rely extraordinarily heavily on China.
There's been some good work done by Jordan at the limiting factor on the clay opportunity, and I'd encourage our viewers to check those out. But I know you said Elon Musk is kind of looking at clay. You spent 2.5 minutes of Battery Day kind of talking about that, but the reality is he's building hydroxide from hard rock. The reality is, in the past, he looked at buying things in the Salton Sea. He's commented on Twitter that Standard Lithium looks interesting.
The DLE, has great promise. It's just got to be executed on, and that takes time.
What's important point is that lithium, all these processes work. There's no question you can get lithium from clay, right, and turn into hydroxide. There's no question you can't take, DLE brine. It's just a question of how much you need to upgrade the concentration, process it, get the purity level, to the level that needs to be put into, 8-year, warranty Tesla and Western OEM batteries. So the question is the cost and the scalability of it. A distinction between, let's say, an E3 or a standard lithium, or the Salton Sea, the resource is underground, right? And you're basically taking a waste, right? So the land footprint is very small compared to a clay project. The land footprint is huge. You're still mining and digging up an enormous amount. And then ultimately in Lithium America's case, they're turning it into a brine. It's a wet process, right? And brines need to kind of go to carbonate before they go to hydroxides. What E3 is doing, taking an abandoned oil field, taking that waste area where they want to transition, right? Alberta is very, permit friendly and very focused on this. So the ability, and it's a huge resource. So if you can convert that resource, the land footprint, the sustainability, the carbon footprint, is much less digging up huge swaths of Nevada and pumping, tons of acid, into it. Just from and the cost is probably going to be the same in from what I gather, right? So what do you think about that? Am I overstating this contrast?
Yeah, ideally, if you could make the world's, zero carbon and DLE could do it all, that would be great. But Elon Musk is exploring the potential of table salt into clay, and then putting it back. So I guess on first principles, he's seeing something that's environmentally acceptable. There are no real easy answers. How there's easy theories, but there aren't. We'll need to see how these things go in practice.
Bottom line is, I'm calling this kind of like America the Bidenful, and with Biden and Jennifer Granholm, the home of the brave, Granholm the brave, is very focused on creating good jobs with a energy transition to clean energy, and supply chains, critical minerals are being spoken and written in press releases coming out of the US government, every day. They interjected themselves into the SK LG dispute, quite significantly. And I believe that what's coming is, in addition to EV subsidies, support, and the like, but there's going to be local content demands or moral suasion, if not hard targets like Europe put for 80%. So I think it is important for anyone who's interested in, North American lithium supply and junior mining companies like we're focused on, that are advancing greenfield projects to become part of this supply of 2030. This is how you should be thinking about it, right? 400 to 500,000 tons, 20 to 30 Piedmonts, and $12 to $20 billion of capital. It's great news. You've upgraded your forecast. So that's the fresh, headline of this. It's 2.9, million tons, not 2 million tons, which I've been talking about kind of for the past year. On our scoreboard, I think junior developers, are maybe $5 or $6 billion in aggregate in market cap. And if you take the number that I just said, 12 to 20 billion, if you look at the money that's been put into EV themed SPACs in the past 9 months, it's been about 20 billion. So if the US equity capital markets can raise in 9 months $20 billion, why shouldn't they be able to raise that amount of money, so that by 2030, these projects will be there? I think the answer is it can, and it will, with lithium prices aggressively rising as they are. And as people start thinking about, that 16,000 hydroxide is actually a more realistic number, then the equities of the lithium companies on our scoreboard are going to continue to rise and are going to continue to attract, this capital over time.